right, David. So David Bland has been working with DuPont for a while, and he's going to tell us some interesting things, I think, about that. I want to tell you a little bit more about him. So he is a sought-after speaker and a thought leader in the fields of innovation, entrepreneurship, and product development. He's recognized for his engaging and dynamic presentations, which draw on his extensive experience working with startups and Fortune 500 companies. Insights, David helps organizations develop a culture of innovation and implement effective processes for creating and launching new products and services. He is the founder and CEO of Precoil, an innovative consulting firm, and the author of Oop, that's not it.
You're muted here.
Ideas in business book and printed in over 20 languages. His writing has been featured in Harvard Business Review, and David has guest lectured at Harvard, Yale, Berkeley, London School of Business, and other high-profile institutions and conferences, none of which compare to DuPont. So let me introduce David. Thank you so much.
I'll share my screen. So let me share my screen here. We'll get set here. All right, do a tech check over here, make sure everything's, see everything? Awesome. So thank you. I'm just honored to be here, and I've been working with DuPont for the last 3 years with the support of Alexa. None of this would have been possible without her support. And this is the first time that I've really taken a step back with the team and put together what we've been doing and presenting it externally. We've been doing a lot of hard work internally, but I wanted to share with you behind the scenes what we've been doing, also share a case study with you. And then I would love, I know people are stuck at the gate, but I would love for DuPonters to actually join me in the Q&A, because I see some of them from our team today. And you could even ask them questions. You don't even have to ask me all the questions. I'm happy to have them answer some questions too of what it's like to work with me and also the work that we've done together. So today I'm going to be working through sort of the process that we followed. And I want to hold the questions, if possible, till the end, because I would like to bring, again, DuPont up to help answer some of the questions. So today I'm going to be focusing on the lean innovation process. This is something that we've been heads down working on, helping de-risk new opportunities and new growth at DuPont. And so I just want to give a high-level overview of that and go through the case study with you. I'm not going to spend too much time on me. I'm David. I was based in the Bay Area for a long time. Now I'm outside Sacramento. Been working with DuPont for about 3 years on this. I focus on high uncertainty work, which is a bit odd maybe to frame myself that way, but that's what I do. So if you're working on something in your business, something new, or something you're going to a different market and you're really worried about it and it keeps you up at night, I give you a way to visualize that, break it down into smaller chunks and go test. I learned this probably the hard way at startups. I worked at a lot of B2B startups over my career in finance and defense and analytics. And then around 2011 or 12 or so, I started advising big companies in San Francisco and companies like GE and Adobe and Toyota, and it's sort of like been doing that since then. And what I've learned is it's not a one process fits all type of approach. So while I'm going to show you the high level, what this looks like for you could be slightly different, because we focus on the principles and then we cultivate the practices from the principles, which sounds easy when I say that, but doing that in practice is actually quite hard. And so I've seen this at enough different organizations over the years that even though I have a flow, it looks slightly different in each org depending on your needs and your market and where you are. So let's start with, well, why should you test your ideas? this is what I do all the time. I help companies test their ideas and reduce uncertainty. But even I get it wrong. And I just wanted to share maybe a humbling story that I experienced a few years ago. So when I wrote Testing Business Ideas, I couldn't write a book about testing without testing it. It didn't feel right. And the book can feel like, I don't know, how many of you written books? I've seen some out here. Share of hands, people that have written books, a few of you. So it feels like a very waterfall process. You know, you go to your publisher, you submit your outline, you have your draft, you submit it, they edit it, and red pen everywhere, and then, you know, it feels like a very waterfall-like approach. And I thought, well, how do we test that? How do we break that model? And what we did is we tested all these different book covers. So we tested these with readers. I would invite people up and I would say, I would show them a picture of a cover and I would say, imagine you're standing in a bookstore and you see this cover. Tell me what you think this book is about. And it was such a humbling experience for me because there were little things that I thought like, oh, I had these little icons in the book that we hand drew. And someone was like, yeah, I don't know what this icon is. And in my head, I'm screaming, it's binoculars. It's clearly a pair of binoculars. And they're like, no, I don't know what this is. And I'm like, I'm like screaming inside my head, it's binoculars. But I realized that even though I do this all day long, I also have my own biases and my own assumptions in my work. So to share with you, I thought, oh, by far, this is going to be the one that people want. It's got a nice, clean design. It looks almost like a Harvard Business Review cover. And for those of you that have the book, that is not the one that won. By far and away, this one was the one that won. And at first I thought, well, I can't win. There's no way this can win. It looks like it's got all these eyeball things and rays. It looks like Illuminati. I'm going to have to write secret messages in my book. And it, by far and away, this is the one that people thought, okay, this resonates with me the most. I understand what this book is about. We also tested this little blurb. It's not like a subtitle, but it's, I don't know what the official name is, but it's a little blurb that tells you what the book is about. It's on all the Strategizer books. And I think one of the reasons why this is now in 20 different languages and it's over 100,000 copies sold is because we tested the content mercilessly through the process. You know, testing the content of the pages. We tested the book titles. One of the best things my editor gave me as advice, there were two things. One, he said, call the book what it does. And I was like, okay, well, it helps people test business ideas. And then he said, write this book like you're coaching a team. And I coach teams all the time. So that will like unlock me a bit and go through that process. But I'm just sharing this story with you because even I get it wrong. You know, I thought I knew all the answers. I've been doing this for 10 or 15 years, and I don't have to test this. But in doing it, obviously I realized I made some assumptions. My biases creeped in. I had to go test and see. I had to go test with customers. So this isn't unique to me. You all are probably feeling this as well. We're seeing this on different early stage ideas, and why they fail is because our biases creep in and we focus a lot on feasibility, but we miss the market need and the business model. And so I have to ask myself, how often am I helping teams with feasibility anymore, especially here at DuPont? Not very often, because you're DuPont, you can build anything. And that's not usually where your risk is. And much like all of you in your companies, you can build probably almost anything. So your risk is quite often around the market or the business model. And yet the way we've organized ourselves, the way we go about our work, we sort of snowplow all that risk to the end instead of addressing it up front. And it shows in the success and fail rate of our projects. I've also seen this in my own work. This is a study I did with companies all around the world about why their experimentation fails. And I won't bore you with all the details. I have a link to this if you want when you get the slides. Is confirmation bias is killing our organizations. It's like this silent killer inside of our organizations. When we come to looking at this data, we just confirm our own beliefs. You know, we explain all the data away that doesn't agree with our hypothesis. And what happens is that has ripple effects in our entire innovation process. So things like analysis paralysis, We keep reanalyzing the data, like maybe it'll say something different this time, or we're afraid to take action on the insights that we're seeing. And so we keep having meetings about the data. Have anybody been stuck in those meetings where we're like, why are we meeting about this again? Why are we in this discussing this data again? The other thing that jumps out to me is this idea of failure to learn and adapt, which also plays into that because we're stuck in this learning, well, it's not even a learning loop, it's like an analysis loop. And then the other thing that jumped out to me was when we look at our evidence. So we're making these really big bets on very weak and light evidence. So I love interviews, I love surveys. As marketers, obviously, that's a great place to start for qualitative insights. And we heard a lot about that yesterday from some of the great speakers. But it's relatively light. It's what they say, it's not what they do. And so what I've seen teams do, and this is not unique to DuPont, I also advise some Silicon Valley startups, and I work with other corporations. And what I see is we'll do interviews and surveys, and then we'll place a really big bet on a build project. And I think there's so many options in between that you can take to pay down that risk and not place such a really big bet on what people say they'll do in an interview or what they've written that they will do in a survey. So how this applies to DuPont, and Alexa shared some of this yesterday, it's almost like you have to be ambidextrous in the way you approach this as leaders. And so I'm focused a lot up here on new and renew, but the framework I'm showing you isn't necessarily isolated to that, because the types of risk I'm going to walk through apply to different parts of your business. What I've noticed is your risk kind of moves around over time. At first, it might be a lot of desirability risk, which I'll get into here in a second. And then it might be willingness to pay. And then finally, it might be, can you build this? But so often we start with, can we build this? And that's what gets us into trouble. That's where we see the expensive failures, not the cheaper failures or the quicker failures. So we're focused on new and renew. How do we create new growth? And really, if you think about your top line growth in your company, a lot of my clients see something similar where they're seeing their base fade, not double digits, but single digits over time. And you're challenged with, as leaders, where am I going to find this new growth from? And what I'm seeing in my clients anyway, so for example, I work with Toyota. If you talk to leadership at Toyota, they will say, I don't want to be a car company anymore, or automobile company. I want to be a mobility company. If you notice their branding, it is slightly shifted. It's about, I want to be about mobility. We want to know how to get people from A to B. We know a lot about that. It might be a car. It might be other things that we can do to make money. I work with paint companies. Paint companies don't want to be paint companies anymore. They want to be color companies. They know so much about color. Why restrict it to just paint? So when you think about where are we going to get these new ideas from, I don't feel like the ideas are the hard part. As much as I loved yesterday, I don't feel like the ideas are the hard part. I think testing the ideas is the hard part. So I'm sure you all have backlogs and management systems of ideas. I don't think that's your constraint. I think it's how you test them, how you reimagine what you do in a different way to drive revenue. So our number one goal is to de-risk new growth. How do we pay down the risk and not place these very risky bets on light evidence? When you get it right, you look brilliant. It's like a golden ticket inside your organization. You were the person that built that thing that created hundreds of millions of dollars. But so often we get that wrong. And getting it right feels more like luck and timing than some kind of disciplined process we've gone through. And you have to be careful because you'll trick yourself into, well, I know best. That was a success, so I'm going to do the same thing everywhere. So it's also the hardest work we do inside DuPont. I totally agree with Alexa on that point. It's much easier, I feel like, is to reduce variance in a known process. It takes a certain kind of skill set and personality to work through high uncertainty work, where you might not know the customer that well, you might not know the market needs, you might not know how to deliver value to them. How do you navigate through that? How do you find your way through that messiness? But it doesn't have to be undisciplined. You can apply scientific method, which a lot of you are already ahead of the game compared to my other clients, because you have this strong foundation on scientific method. And it's really applying that in a different context. Think of it almost more like social science. That's what we're applying here. We're testing our hypotheses. We're creating evidence. We're making informed decisions. But at its core, it's scientific method. So we use a blended approach called lean innovation. This is something I'm seeing with my other clients as well, where we're blending different pieces together to make something that works for us. You know, I have a lot of people that read Testing Business Ideas, and they say, oh, I want to do that inside my org. And what I've laid out in the book is great, but it might not work specifically for you in your context. We might need to change parts of it. And I'm more of an editor, I guess I could say, than a writer. It sounds weird to say even though I wrote a book, but I like editing different parts of different methodologies and putting them together in a way that works for you. So with DuPont's case, we've taken design thinking, which I'm a huge fan of, and you'll see how I weave design thinking in with risk, not necessarily the traditional design thinking process. I recently gave a talk at D School at Stanford. They use the book there as well, and they've stopped teaching, you know, the old diagram of design thinking. They don't really teach that anymore. We really come back to the themes of risk when it comes to design thinking. We also weave in business model innovation. I think an easy mistake to make inside your companies is to take your existing business model and your existing product and you create a new version of that product, but you take the same business model and you put it on the new version of your product. It feels like a very safe thing to do, but you're missing a really important opportunity to change your business model there, to try new things. There might be data that your systems are throwing off that you're not packaging up and selling. There might be services you're providing for free that you're not necessarily charging for. You know, there might be licensing opportunities you haven't considered. There's all these different things, especially with digital now. And so don't be too quick to take that existing business model and just slap it on your new product and call it a day. There are opportunities there that you're missing. We also take Lean Startup. So I had the pleasure of working with Eric Ries, who wrote Lean Startup. And it's basically build, measure, learn. It's scientific method applied to business. I hate the name of Lean Startup because it's not really about lean and it's not just for startups. But other than that, I love the ideas behind Lean Startup. I just think it's horrible branding. But the ideas have really become the underpinning of modern product development and modern innovation. Similar to OODA loops. For those of you with military background, observe, orient, decide, act. Very similar to that. If you've seen the movie Top Gun, that's basically an OODA loop. The whole movie is based off of Boyd's work. And so it's applying that to business. How do we go through that cycle? And in Silicon Valley, we do have this saying, you'll win if you learn faster than everyone else. I think that's close, but it's not quite right. The market is not going to reward you for just learning faster than your competitors. You have to take that learning and put it into action. And so I believe if you can take that learning and put it into action faster than anyone else, that's what makes you have an unfair advantage. And then we take Agile. Agile, I love. I first learned Agile, I think it was like 99 or so, or 2000 at the first startup I joined. And I received zero training, by the way. They said, here's a book, now we're Agile. And I was like, oh, gee, thanks. And we were transferring about $1 billion a month in premiums. One failed sprint meant we closed up our startup and go back and live with our parents. So I learned over the years kind of like what Agile should be. And it is about being able to iterate through your solutions and break work down into smaller chunks. And it doesn't really just apply to software anymore. I see a lot of my hardware clients use that as well. So, but what we've done here is we've taken a mix and put this together. So the approach looks something like this. And again, you'll get all these slides. So we prioritized and we scan for opportunities. Then we create our hypotheses and we run experiments to go test those opportunities. We analyze those and we sprint, and then we track those and we make decisions. So it's a very iterative approach, and I'm going to show you a flow. Even inside DuPont, I wouldn't say we have one exact standard. The way we teach it is very structured at the beginning, and I'll share results on the last slide today of the impact of how many teams we've brought through this process and the results. But it's very, very iterative in the sense of you'll prioritize and you might go back and realize, oh, we missed something. Or you'll run an experiment and you'll learn something else and you go back and you have to update things. It's not a check the box mentality. It's not, yep, created my business model. There are a ton of assumptions here, but I'm going to treat them all as facts and we're just going to execute on that business model. That is not what we're advocating here. Now, one of the ways that we sort of combine this into an artifact that we use to drive growth and drive conversations with folks like Alexa and leadership at DuPont is what we call a learning plan. So this is sort of an inside, behind the scenes look of what a learning plan looks like at DuPont. So from the scanning, we're documenting our hypotheses for each project. And so we do have a format for those. We usually use we believe, not all the time, but roughly. We try to make these statements, if possible, that would have to be true for this to work. And we start putting these into a format where, okay, what proof would we need to see to support or refute that hypothesis, to validate or invalidate that? We document our experiments, so tied to the hypothesis. And this could be a one-to-many relationship, by the way. So for example, you might have one hypothesis and many experiments you have to run. Very rarely, unless it's something feasibility and physics related that I see in a lab, very rarely, and you could argue even then, you might probably want to run multiple experiments, do I see we had one experiment we ran and we validated that assumption and we move on. So in your org, I know you're probably using the term like MVP or minimum viable product, or I validated that. That language has permeated most businesses I coach now. Be very careful when you're talking to your team and they say, well, I ran a survey and I validated that, or I talked to a customer and I validated that. You might have supporting evidence, but you may need to run more experiments to get better evidence on that hypothesis. Very rarely are we going to validate our hypotheses with one experiment. That's obviously light evidence. And then we track our learnings. And this is a part of you take your learning and you have to drive it into action. So this isn't performative. You know, this isn't a check the box exercise. This is a living document inside DuPont that teams use, and they use with their stakeholders to say, we have analyzed the risk as a team. Here's our plan to de-risk this, and this is how it's moving around. This is how we're either de-risking or we're not. Okay? And we'll answer some questions about this at the end if you have more questions about this format and how we're doing this with the teams. This also fits into your typical frame gate framework. So this loop can de-risk, especially your early stages of your gates. So when you think about how do you de-risk your ideas early on, you're probably not measuring them on ROI. There are other pieces of evidence you're looking for leading indicators that this might work. And you don't need 100% certainty to make decisions at that stage. So we're not doing this all at once. We're kind of walking through the different themes of risk. And over time, we're trying to de-risk each gate so that we have better evidence to make informed decisions about our investments. Now, I talked about design thinking. I want to pause on this for a moment, and we'll make this a little interactive. So use your mics if possible, or just scream at me. That might work too, depending on how loud you scream. So when we think about risk, I like framing this with design thinking with themes of desirable, viable, and feasible. So with desirability, it's really this do they question. So think about, from a marketing point of view, do they have these unmet needs? Do they have these jobs to be done, functional, social, emotional? Do they have pains they're experiencing? Do they have gains that they're looking for? Do they understand your value proposition? There's a lot of desirability risk baked into our new projects. Do we have the right customer? Do they understand what we're saying? But we also have viability risk, which is more like a should we question. So should we be working on this at all? Are they going to pay enough? Can we keep costs low enough? Is this aligned to our strategy? I feel like sometimes we don't ask this enough as teams. We march through, like, of course somebody thinks we should be doing this, otherwise we wouldn't be doing it. But I like to check, like, what are our assumptions in viability? And then where we spend way too much time is in this can we question, which is feasibility, which is really easy to start with because we all love to make things. And as creative people, humans, we want to go and build right away. But I think we're building to build, we're not building to learn. So you don't have to out any of your teammates in here or your companies, but I want to do like a quick little exercise with you. So have you ever been on a project that people wanted it and you should be working on it, they would pay for it, but it didn't work? Maybe a show of hands. It just didn't work at all. Yeah, I think we've all been on those. I've seen 2 startups crater doing this personally, where people gave us money, we got funding, the technology just simply didn't work the way we thought. We were a little too early in the market. All right, what about this? People wanted it, and you could build it, but they wouldn't pay enough for it. You couldn't make it profitable. Yeah, a lot more hands. Wow, geez, we've all been a part of that, yeah? That is not a fun spot to be either, because you did the market research, or at least you thought you did it well. You built the thing, and they're just not paying enough. And usually, not all the time, I see us do that when we've placed a really big bet on light evidence, or we somehow didn't know how to price things. I love the last talk yesterday about pricing. It was hypothesis driven. I felt like, oh, I'm with my tribe here in this room. Because we need to test pricing sooner versus later. It kills me. I don't want to get on the soapbox here, but I do a lot of Silicon Valley startup advising, and it drives me nuts when I advise a startup and they're like, we'll just figure out the business model later. It's okay. We'll get people addicted to our product first, and then we'll figure that out later. That has not ended us in a great spot, by the way, as an economy. This is why we see some of our companies just raise money over and over and over again on sort of like this fake idea of viability, but they never had a viable business. They just kept getting funding to make it viable till all their competitors went away. And then they go public and raise their prices. It drives me nuts. Okay, but enough about that. Okay, so last one, and I'm hoping I don't see this one, but I got a feeling we might see some hands. It was feasible, you could build it, and it looked like a great business model, but then nobody cared. There was nobody at all, like as a target market. Yeah, it's interesting though, with this crowd, that there were fewer amount of hands there compared to the willingness to pay. So I'm not saying these are unrelated. Obviously, these are all very related themes of risk. But what we do is we systematically unpack these themes, because no matter what kind of company I'm working with, whether it's B2B or B2C, hardware, software, on Earth, in space, I do stuff with Singularity, and they're literally 3D printing on the space station. It's crazy. You still have to address these three themes of risk, no matter what. Now, you don't address them all at once, but you are going to have to address them. I think, depending on your organization, what you might want to do, and I don't want to define roles for each circle, but you might want to say, hey, with our early stage innovation projects, do we have representation from all three themes of risk in our company? Do we have people that'll help us go through and test these? So we use a little method called EMT. It's out of Testing Business Ideas, where we extract and we map and we test. And I'm going to give you a high level of this, but I'm going to explain it through a case study. And I'm not going to get into the details of the exact experiments as far as how everything worked, but I'm going to show you at a high level. If you have more questions about the specific project, we do have team members in the room that can talk to it as well. So this is kind of our process. We extract our risk. We go off and we map it. We prioritize the most important assumptions, and then we go test. And then we find out, oh, we learned new things. So we go back and we update our maps, and we may even update some of the assumptions we have. So this is the case study I want to walk you through. So this is a team from Vespel that were in cohort 4 of our cohort process. So just to give you an idea what the cohort process was, we took about 35 teams through this process, roughly 10 weeks or so, and we kind of went through each step along the way, but we did it on real opportunities. It wasn't training for training's sake. We loaded up real opportunities and took them through this process to basically make informed investment decisions on them. So we did 6 cohorts. We've also continued training teams after then, but this was cohort 4 out of 6, so if you're wondering where that's coming from. So polyimide, basically going into film here. I'm not going to get into all the details. It's very interesting. I used to show this parody video of an entrepreneur in Canada who was talking about wrapping organic compounds in nanotube coating. And we use it as a joke, as like, no one's going to understand what you're saying. And the first time I showed that video here at DuPont, people were like, that sounds like a pretty good idea. I was like, oh my gosh, I've never heard that before. So obviously, if you have really specific questions about this, we have folks in the room that can talk about the technology. But what I'm going to focus on is the process, okay? So this fits into like NVIDIA graphic cards. This fits into Tesla's automated driving. This fits into some of the Bosch components as well. But what I want to focus here is sort of like a statement that we have. We have a template we use for forcing the teams to go through, how would I describe this? And it's kind of like an elevator pitch, similar to that, where we talk about, okay, what are we doing? Who are we helping? So our polyimide rigid laminates help military and automotive OEMs who want to design and build next-gen rigid PCBs for high speed and high frequency applications. So who want to, what are we trying to do? And then here, and I'll show the canvas in a minute, we're really trying to it's almost like ad libs with the jobs, pains, and gains. So we want to reduce signal loss and remove PFAS and improve product reliability and processability. And then we have unlike. Now this is a really interesting part. I like this part of the template because at times we feel like, oh, we don't have any competitors. But sometimes even if you don't have a traditional competitor, you're competing with other things they do manually, or you're competing with them doing nothing. Especially with some of the regulations coming out of the EU. Are they going to hit here? Maybe, maybe not. Let's just do nothing and fight. Right? So be mindful of when you're thinking about the jobs to be done for your customer. When you think about the jobs to be done, think about things that they're doing that may not just fall into your market research reports of your existing competitors. So we do the statements. And then we start extracting, and then we start mapping. So with extracting, I'm not going to deep dive on the canvas. I will have to keep me on time because I could ramble about this for hours. So I use, again, it's part of the strategizer stack, the value prop canvas. I feel like this, I also use empathy maps. I use, there's a job to be done canvas. I'm not necessarily specifically tied to a specific tool, as long as it fits the purpose of what we're trying to do. So value prop canvas, I feel, is like one of the trickier tools to use because we start over here with customer jobs. So what are the functional, emotional, social jobs of the customer here? And a customer, we're trying to talk about specific kinds of customers. And then what are the pains they're experiencing? So you think about it, if you anchor on the jobs, you could say, okay, what have I heard from my customers as far as what are they struggling with trying to do this job well? And then what are the gains they're looking for? And here's where you have to be careful. If I train a team the first time, they'll say, our customer has this job, and the pain is it's hard to do the job, and the gain is we did the job. And that is not going to be a fruitful exercise with your team. What is more helpful is saying, okay, what are the pains we've heard around this job? And then the gains could be other things like peer recognition. I get a bonus, I get a promotion. Like there are other things around the gains aspect that may not be directly tied to, oh yes, I did the job. Then we move over to the value prop or the value map here, and we say, what are our products and services? Okay. What are our pain relievers? And then what are our gain creators? And so what we do is we usually start with the circle, and we really try to deeply understand the customer, their jobs, pains, and gains. We try to go check those with the customer. We don't just do this in a vacuum inside the building. And then we check, do we have fit? And I know we throw this term around a lot in Silicon Valley, fit. But what fit means here is we're checking to see, do our products and services really solve for these jobs that the customer has? Sometimes it might solve for a job that's like a nuisance, and they're never going to pay enough for that. They might just ignore it and it goes away. But do we have any evidence that what we are going to create solves for this job? We also check our pain relievers against the pains. Sometimes we're solving a really painful pain and it's obvious. Other times, what if we're solving pain number 10 and they just don't care enough? We're going to see weak adoption in what we build. And then with gains, we're trying to see, can we create these gains? Can we create these delighters with our customer as well? So it's not really a left to right tool. We jump around a bit, but we start with the circle, who's the customer? In this case, military and automotive OEMs. And then we start mapping this out and testing with the customer. It's not done in a vacuum. We're going and checking with the customer. We also use the business model canvas. Again, my co-author, Alex Osterwalder, created this tool. I've seen thousands of these over the years, and the biggest mistake I usually see with these is people treat it like a checklist, and they're just checking the box of each box. But in reality, how I use it is we start with, hey, who's your customer? Can we list out who your customers are? And you might have different segments. We heard about segmentation a lot yesterday. We would designate those different segments. And this is a more zoomed out view of your business model. What's our value prop to them? Not your product and service all the time, but what's our value to them? How do we reach them? Through channels, acquisition, distribution channels. How do we get to our customers? How do we build relationships with them? Is it impersonal? Is it personal? Is it one time? Is it ongoing? How do we make money from them? Indirectly, directly from the customer. And then backstage, we go through activities, think key verbs. What are the things we need to do? Resources, what do we need to have? Physical, digital. Sometimes it's a factory. Sometimes it's right to practice with patents and IP. Sometimes it's our brand. Sometimes it's our team. who we partner with, who are we partnering with to power this, and then how much is this going to cost? And so I almost use this, we were talking about storytelling yesterday. I almost use this as your one-page strategy document to tell your story. So how am I going to tell a story to leadership of this is our business model? And I'm a big believer. We talked about NPV yesterday a little bit too. I love that. So thank you. I'm not anti-NPV, but there are certain situations where it doesn't help. And early stage, I would much rather have a team explain the business model to me than a business plan. You need to understand the underlying model before any of your plans are going to be remotely accurate. It's almost like creative fiction in Excel. That's what we're doing. Yeah, there's a joke in Silicon Valley that investors require the startups to create 5-year business plans and then they never read them because they know. So what I work with at DuPont here is understanding the business model because we need to go test the model. We have evidence for the model, then we can build out a plan that we really believe in. So there's almost like a flow to it, right? You're partnering with people who bring activities or resources that you need. They might be a channel partner to help you get to your customer. We look at our activities and resources. We can come up with our costs. We deliver our value prop to our customers. We build relationships with them. We generate revenue from them. So the early version of this tool looked like a systems thinking diagram, and then it was iterated to a series of boxes. I think when it became boxes, people lost the relationships between things. I see a lot of PowerPoints with a lot of bullets, and people look at this and they say, okay, I filled in all the boxes and now I'm going to move on. But the way I try to use it is storytelling, and then can we test our strategy? Or even better yet, can we take snapshots of this along the way, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months? What's changed? How do we communicate to leadership that we changed a segment or we changed a channel? And what are the ripple effects that's had? And then we map. So this is one of my favorite exercises, assumptions mapping. I helped create this when I was a consultant back at NEO. And this is used by Google and a bunch of other companies that have requested. So if you go to Google's design sprint, you're going to see this in there referenced with me and everything. But what essentially is we're taking those assumptions we've written down and we're prioritizing them. I used to stack rank these and that was okay. I used to dot vote these and I felt like risk shouldn't be a popularity contest where we're just putting dots and the most dots is the thing we'll test. So we came up with this 2x2 and we're really focused on the most important assumptions we've made with the least amount of evidence. And this is where the color coding helps because you can tell, if you just squint, you can start seeing what kind of risk do we have. Is it desirability risk, which is in orange around the customer and the value prop? Is it viability risk in the green, which is about cost and revenue? Is it feasibility risk in the blue, which is about our right to practice and our ability to execute? And I have to say, this is my elaborate way of tricking people to talk to each other. It is. We have a bunch of risk management systems in our companies, and what kills me is like a lot of them don't include the customer. And we think we can de-risk inside the building, and you can't. So this is one of my favorite exercises because I love the conversations of getting people that represent each theme: desirable, viable, feasible. Get marketing, get design, get research, get product, get finance, get the engineers, get legal, get compliance and safety together and reason through what would kill this project. And there's an element of compromise. You have to have that conversation. If I do it with just designers or just marketers, yes, you'll have an opinion of what will kill it, but you don't know where it compares to whether we can build it or how much it's going to cost sometimes. So I do like that cross-functional sort of collaboration of a conversation about risk. So that's what we've done here with Vespel. And I won't go into all the different assumptions we have here, but basically we had some desirability assumptions around the properties, about the non-PFAS. We had some viability assumptions around the resin and film process, and we had some feasibility assumptions around just our ability to support and build this, all right? So did this with the team, and then we go off and we test, because this is all great, but you have to go test and go check and find out. So with testing, this is one of the reasons I wrote the book. So we'll try to get you copies if you need it. We'll just coordinate through Rand and Lori on that. But we use the library from the book to go test these. Okay, so there are 200 pages of experiments in the book. A lot of them will seem very familiar to some of you in marketing, but there are other things that maybe you've never heard of. But basically, we went through what are our critical, desirable, viable, feasible hypotheses? What would have to be true for this to work? And you'll notice a lot of desirability here, not so much regards to feasibility, which doesn't surprise me because, again, DuPont could build anything, and some viability, some willingness to pay, and cost. But a lot of your risk is probably similar to this in your projects where, yes, we could build it, but do we know the market? Really know the market? And will they pay enough? And so what we did is we sort of, I call it like sequencing or pairing. These are some screenshots from the book, but we take our library that we've custom built for DuPont and we've curated which experiments work and what don't, kind of your own playbook that works for your industry. I've done this for pharma and other industries. It's very different between industries, like what works for you, so not all the experiments apply. But what we did is we took things like custom interviews, but we paired them with things like a data sheet. And so I'll show you an example of the data sheet, but it's basically what we could have built and get feedback on that. We did this exercise called buy a feature, where we give them like play money and points, and we have them prioritize features, but there's never enough money or points to buy all the features. And therefore, your customer has to force rank those on their own. They have to prioritize on their own. How many have been in a conversation where you say, everything's the most important, you have to deliver on everything? In reality, you're like, yeah, I don't know. I think there's some priority here that we can get to. And sometimes it's hard to get to that priority just through talking to them. And then, can we do some prototyping as well? But we try to pair, we try to not just talk to the customer, but we do these other things with the customer to make it more interactive, to get a stronger strength of evidence to make a more informed decision, to close what we call this say-do gap. And I won't go into all the taxonomy here, but all the experiments are ranked by, cost, setup time, runtime, evidence strength, capabilities, the desirable, viable, feasible themes. Each experiment's tagged with that, so you can see a list of experiments that match your risk. It's another problem I saw in my teams I coach. We would run, let's say, an experiment, but it wouldn't help us test the assumption or the hypothesis, and therefore we wouldn't get the learning that we needed to get. And then teams are like, why are we running experiments? Let's just go build the whole thing. So here's an example of the data sheet. So thank you, DuPont Legal, for clearing this. It's hard to read here, but you'll see the slide. But these were the technical properties, right, of this specific project. And it's interesting, it gives your client something to respond to. As we set the context, obviously you have to set the context properly, but it gives them something to respond to versus just words, just talking. So what happened to this project? Well, we stopped it. Like, this is not a wild $100 million successful project that I'm sharing with you today. I'm sharing you something that successfully failed. And it failed not because of technical feasibility. You can build anything here at DuPont. It failed because of commercial viability and market desirability. It wasn't necessarily something that people wanted, that they would pay enough for. And I think we should celebrate killing these off. These shouldn't live on like zombie projects in your organization where they're not living and they're not dead. They make a little bit of revenue, but never enough. You get calls on the weekends of, hey, can we do a support call because something went wrong? They don't have defined success criteria. They just live on and suck up resources and time and energy and morale. One of the ways we can use this process is to kill off the things we shouldn't be working on and double down on the things that we should be working on. And that's what we do inside DuPont. So I consider this a win. No one got fired, no one got reprimanded, no one said, well, go back with that chart and make the numbers look better. No. I'm sure your company doesn't do that, but maybe like your friend's company does that. But it's a real fear, and it's why we spend so much time manipulating our failures to seem like successes. And I think we should just celebrate the failures. That's what Alexa does with Dead Projects Day. And we should celebrate those inside of our organization because they saved us money. They saved us tens of millions, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars. So I'm a big believer that we don't need more ideas. Every company I work with, we have enough ideas. We have too many ideas. But we need a better way to de-risk those ideas, to test those ideas. We need a repeatable process to do that and make more informed investment decisions on how we get top-line growth. So what I want to show you is this slide. This is my favorite slide of the whole deck. And I know I've drawn through a lot. I'm not going to draw through this one. So this is how many teams and ideas we've worked with at DuPont over the last 3 years. So we've had 6 structured cohorts. The training and the process has continued beyond those cohorts. It's just more ad hoc now. 35 different growth projects. We're covering all our lines of business. We have over 300 trained practitioners. I think we have a lot more than that, actually. Senior leadership has also been trained because it's not just about the teams and the ideas, it's about how leaders interact with those teams. What kind of questions do you ask of a team that is an early stage innovation project versus something that's been tried and true and you're adding a small thing to something that is already a known quantity? We have coaches. So we've created our own internal coach capability here at DuPont because I can't clone myself. And the coaches, I love pairing with them. They ask really probing questions. They push the teams in ways that maybe even I wouldn't sometimes. It's really fun working with the coaches here. We have 100% learning plans on all our growth projects. I think Alexa mentioned that yesterday. It's not just an artifact. It's something we're literally using for all the new business. And we're having these as a placeholder for a conversation with leadership. So it is an artifact, but we're trying to use it to drive outcomes because they're iterated on, they're updated. Our risk moves around from desirability to viability and then feasibility and then back as we try to scale. So it's a great document to frame for that conversation. And we have a community of practice that we're building inside the company where we can all grow and get better. So I'm really excited to share this with you today as something that it's not just a workshop. It wasn't just a 1 month thing. We've been working at this for 3 years. And this is the first time we've ever shared this story with a larger forum. So I want to thank you for letting me share my story. And I'd also invite some questions for me or for any of the members of the DuPont team who are part of this. I'd love for you to come up as well and answer any questions depending on how much time we have. Okay, we have time, good. So who would like to ask a question? Can we get maybe Lucas or something up here, and then anyone else that wants to join as far as the projects? We have Greg as well in here. So yeah, if we could run mics around and have folks with Mike. So we have a question up here. We'll just, I don't know who's first, so I'll let.
Mine's really basic. It doesn't require a team.
Okay.
Who was the author of the Lean Startup book? There are so many with that title.
Eric Rees.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was it.
Yeah, it's an easy one. So Eric and I met before he wrote the book, and we've paired on things at GE and Toyota together. And I learned a lot from him for how to apply this to a big company. So yeah, it's definitely a good read. It's a bit older now. I think it was 2010-ish it was written, but it's still great for leaders inside organizations as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Great presentation. Question, clearly when you're DuPont, you can pretty much get access to almost anybody, any customer in the world, because you've got that brand and name recognition. How do smaller companies who are trying to do this get access to these new customers or new markets that they don't know and don't have that DuPont cachet behind them?
Yeah, you'd be surprising. Even with DuPont, sometimes it's hard to get to customers. With small companies, a couple approaches I've seen is when I talked about partnerships in the business model, having channel partners or people you can partner with that are trusted entities that get you access to new markets. I've seen that work pretty well. Sometimes you can be very creative on how you access them. But usually, and I kind of lived this at the startups. I was part of 3 different startups, and we sold to big enterprises, so it was tough for them to take us seriously, and we had to find partners that would give us some credibility. So I don't know if you've tried that approach, but exploring partnerships there for a very specific reason, which would be a channel partner, could be interesting there. And then you'd be surprised, things like webinars still work. I know that might sound weird, but still, if you have a topic you're an expert in and you want to explain it and have a call to action at the end, webinars still work pretty well as far as getting people through that funnel and having them schedule calls with you. So I think it'd be a combination of those two that could help. But I'm happy to chat after the session too. Yeah.
Just a comment about that. So one of the tools that we've used often is the trade show, right? And not just attending the trade show, but actually doing some of these experiments. In fact, David didn't have time to talk about it, but one of the experiments that this Vestel team did was actually at a trade show. So they had a prepared script. Anybody who walked by, they would test. So it allows you to get a lot of information in a short amount of time. So that's one of the ways that you can do it even if you're not DuPont.
Yeah, another thing I just want to expand on that really quickly and we get to more questions. sometimes you have a very complicated like B to B to B to B to C sort of model where you're at in your value chain. And a lot of times you're at the mercy of
Not your house
the
for sale, is
partner
it,
that
Jerry?
they know the customer. And I don't want to
Yeah.
frighten any of you, but I probably work with some of your customers and they
Yeah.
hire me because they don't know their
That's not your
customers.
house.
So,
That's not your house for sale.
not a DuPont project, but one project I was working on was for Victoria's Secret, or a product that was sold through Victoria's Secret. And the company at leadership at Victoria's Secret was like, we're not going to put this on the shelf because women don't want this. We don't want to put this on our shelves. And instead, what we did is we went to women and tested with women, created those video testimonials, actually pre-sold, even though this company was never going to go B2C, generated the evidence, brought it back to Victoria's Secret and said, hey, remember you said nobody wanted this? Here's our evidence that, you know, we do have some early adopters that want this. It does solve a need. It was functional fashion. So sometimes I don't want you to burn bridges with your partners and your channel partners, but sometimes you need to go around to the end customer. Even if you never plan on going B2C, going around, generating evidence and using that evidence to inform those conversations to support your point of view. So. Yeah.
I agree, David. It was very, very interesting conversation. I wanted to ask the 24% killed that you mentioned. Is that kind of like what you see as typical? Like what I'm wondering is that should it be higher than that? Because it kind of says 76% weren't.
We're actually having that conversation now. Personally, I would love that to be 60 or 70%. And I think there are many reasons for why it isn't that high. And again, we're 3 years into our journey here at DuPont. But if I compare it to some of the other companies, they have usually about a 60 to 70% kill rate, or sunset rate, or compost rate, or park rate, or shelf rate, whatever terminology works in your organization. The sustainability companies I work with, they're using compost a lot, which I love. But if you spend, let's say, $100,000 on 250 early stage innovation projects, you should kill about 60 to 70% of those. So you're only really going to have one out of those that's going to be a major revenue driver. It takes that many bets to get that one big revenue driver. You'll have some that'll be fledgling businesses or adolescent businesses that they'll get you some growth, but it's not just corporations. You can look at investors and how they spread their bets over 10 years, over 250 startups to get that one unicorn. It's somewhat similar inside corporations. You can't have 3 or 4 ideas in your pipeline and that's all you're testing. What'll happen is people will cling to those ideas even when they should be killed because there are not more ideas to work on and they fear for their job and their safety. So what I'd recommend is placing your bets. Obviously, they need to be filtered through your portfolio and where you're going as a company, but don't be afraid to place many, many different bets and run them through because it's going to take that level of rigor to find something that's going to be a really big revenue driver inside your company. So I would love this to be higher. I think we can get that higher. But yeah, that was a good observation. I'll leave this slide up to while we're doing Q&A. Sure.
David? Or here. Sir.
Sure.
Two comments. One, the projects that went through this cohort were prioritized coming in. We were asking for the business's most important projects. So they have been vetted or pre-screened to a degree. So I think that impacts these statistics as well. And then if you add the pivots up with the kills, you're about at 60%. So if you want to think about ideas coming in that were flawed, it was that 60%. The last comment I'll make is going through this process. We often hear in these kind of communities it's hard to kill a project, right? Going through this process gives the team through the learning plan the evidence that to come back and advocate to kill their own project because they're seeking to deliver proof points on the critical hypothesis. And when we don't deliver it, they're either in a pivot or kill mode. So we find that teams are more willing to kill their own projects going through this.
Thank you. And we're also keeping stakeholders in the loop as we go. So it's not a big surprise when we make that recommendation. And 9 times out of 10, the leadership and the team are on the same page. So it's not we go off and we work and test and then we like, haha, this is what we're doing. It's not like that. We keep them, they don't need to be day to day, but we do keep them in the loop as we go. Sure, go ahead.
David, thank you for sharing very powerful and encouraging presentation. I was wondering, as Alexa mentioned yesterday, nothing happens without people. And I was wondering if you have ever run into challenges around culture of innovation, so to speak, as and when you have this very tangible process that establishes and moves innovation forward in a lean manner. How has people interaction been in terms of being able to see what this process provides or
Oh, it all comes down to people. Yeah, I think having leadership support, people like Alexa make this possible. I think if you try this at a team level without leadership support, you might get a little progress, but then you're going to plateau and then you're going to fall off. So it's not something, questioning your assumptions like this is pretty exhausting work. And so not many people sign up for this without some sort of incentive or goal or big vision that we're trying to do. And I think from a leader's point of view, it's very interesting. I feel as if from a style, a lot of leadership I see is transactional styles. So I trust you, but I ask you to do a thing and you did the thing, and that's why I trust you. It's very surface level. So what I'm looking for is not that you have to do word analysis on your leaders when you get back after this talk, but I look for leaders who aren't always speaking in first person. This is what I would do, or me, or my. I look for we, our, us. I look for leaders that are leading with questions that are not necessarily holding people accountable, but they're giving them the space to give an account. So like this, you're giving an account of, did we de-risk this? Should we go for it or not? So it's not, this is the experiments I would run, go run these, and then I'll pick and choose. So it does take a specific style of leadership where it's almost like you're describing the goal, but you're giving the team some autonomy to find their way through that and de-risk it. And so I find, and I don't know what you all think, but I have this really big hypothesis that within the next 5 years, most of your revenue should come from ideas that were from teams closest to the customer. If you can empower those teams, then they can find those unmet needs and they can bring them to you and we can work through that together. But it's all about people. I think what makes this so fun is the strong scientific method and scientific foundation that DuPont is built upon. But it's not trivial to take what you do in a lab and then apply it to your customers and business. The context is quite different, even though you have that sort of muscle memory and everything. So I think it's all about leadership support and leading with questions, not answers, not I know best, because your expertise can kind of work against you, kind of like the book with me. If I hadn't tested that, I would have went out with a different title and a different cover. Maybe it wouldn't have been as successful. So yeah, sure.
David,
Yes, Greg.
thank you. I was pleased that you included a discussion of business model as a venue for innovation. But one of my pet peeves is that we all have different definitions of business model. I'd like to hear yours, and to the extent that you can talk about them, I'd like to hear some examples where business model, an innovation in the business model was important in the breakthrough.
Yeah, so my definition of business model comes from Alex Osterwalder, my co-author, who wrote his PhD he wrote his PhD thesis on business model ontology. So I guess to get a PhD, you have to use words like ontology. I don't know, but it's how you create, deliver, and capture value. That's how I would define a business model. So I don't know what we could share in the venue up here, but I'll default to other folks.
I got one. The project that I'm leading right now, typically what DuPont would do, and you all know this, we're a material supplier powerhouse, right? There's not much about material science that we don't or can't do. But what we discovered is that behaving as a material supplier, we're not necessarily capturing the value that we would be able to capture if we extend up the value chain. And so for this one particular project, we're playing as a material supplier, but we're inserting ourselves as an integrator as well. I've talked with some of you, this is the cardiac monitor project that we're working on. So we're very specifically trying to play, we're not losing our material science background or everything, but we're trying to play as the integrator further up the value chain. What David teaches is that if you're going to do that, if you're going to transition up the value chain like that, it can't be the same value proposition. It can't even be the same language. You have to talk the language of the customers if that's where you are in the value chain. So it's still an experiment in progress, but that's one that's a lot of people in DuPont are thinking about.
Yeah, if there's a book, if you're looking for some reading on this, So what I've written is book 3 out of the Strategizer series. Book 4 is called Invincible Company. It has a lot of the patterns that we apply as far as shifts go, especially those of you that are shifting different places in the value chain. So if you're looking for some of the patterns we're using here, I'd recommend that book as well. Questions?
So I love everything we went through here, and I think this process is really exciting. Were there other skill sets that you uncovered as you started trying to run this process that you said, oh, maybe we thought we were good at this, but this process is now saying we got to go train or get better on other subsets? And if so, like, what were some of those skill sets?
Yeah, I think the big thing for us, or the big learning, was like we can go and have all these customer interviews and talk with them, but are we sharing with them the correct information and asking the right questions to make sure we meet the gap in that say-do gap? So they say they're interested, but is that going to lead to a purchase order? Are they serious about it? And how do we ask those questions early on before we go and invest millions on a CapEx project and scale it up and build the product?
Another example, we got started down this path in 2018 timeframe, and we did enough pilots and experiments to understand that we were going in the right direction. One of the gaps that we had was we would develop a learning plan. We develop a critical hypothesis and proof that we were seeking, but we weren't using our imaginations the way we should have to figure out how to test those hypotheses. And when we were looking to take this to the next level, David was one of the folks that we interviewed as a part of the process of picking a journey partner for this next phase. And he literally wrote the book on testing business ideas. And you see his engagement style. It really helps to help. He really pulls people in. He's got a great ability to challenge and provoke people, but not threaten them at the same time. I think you see that in the way that he engages with the audience today. And he was very collaborative. He was willing to take what we had as a foundation and then help us move it forward by bringing what he knew. So that's another example. Lindsay, did you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something real quick. So when you saw the model, the 3 areas to de-risk: market desirability, commercial viability, technical feasibility. I doubt there's one person in your organization who can answer all 3 of those questions, right? So having 2 in a box, or 3 in a box, we call it, people from all these different functions that can help work together and build those skills in each other was really, really powerful.
Yeah, one of the other gaps that we found after we started this phase of the journey was we trained practitioners, we trained coaches, and initially we thought that's enough to get it started. But leadership interacting with these teams was asking the same old stage-gatey kind of questions about NPV and so forth. So we had to train the leadership about how to interact with these teams that are working in the early stages in a way that encourages them to practice this methodology and really get to the point where we're confident that we're working on the right project. We called it lean innovation because it's really addressing the ultimate waste in R&D, spending your money on something that no one wants, or it won't make money for you, right? So we're trying to eliminate that ultimate waste.
Yeah, leadership's really important. It's almost unfair to say, okay, now pretend you are an early stage venture capitalist and talk with this team. It's just the context is too hard. So we've been doing a lot of training with leaders on what kind of questions to ask for desirability and viability. And sometimes we don't have anybody paying yet. So what are the leading indicators that they'll pay? So we've been doing a lot of training there to help just inform those conversations and make those more aligned. Yeah.
David, another quick question. In some of these new spaces, obviously, when you go talk to the customer, they're going to tell you about what they're currently using and the pain points and everything around it. DuPont may not be the only company or folks that are trying to solve or create innovation with that customer. So how does DuPont and/or the customer identify out of kind or other competition that's not the incumbent, so to speak, right? Because you might be competing with other alternatives that are not yet in the game.
Yeah, I don't know how much we can share specific of DuPont. I'll default to the team, but in my other work, I don't want to say how I break rules of survey design, but sometimes I like people rambling to me about how they tried to do something and what other things they considered. So I work with a bunch of travel companies in San Francisco, and one of the questions we asked were, hey, what else did you try to use to book this trip? Or what else have you used? And the executives I was working with at the time said, oh, our competitors are Expedia and Hotwire and Travelzoo. And all, like they had it all laid out. It looked professional in a research report. And then people kept typing Groupon. And they're like, what is this? Like, what does Groupon have? And Groupon had moved into experiences at the time for travel and weekends. And so those execs didn't even know they were competing with Groupon. So sometimes you do have to give your competitors space to talk, or your customers space to talk to you about what they're doing in an open-ended. I know it's hard to sit there and listen, but you're going to learn stuff like this. We wouldn't have learned that if we said, "Oh, these radio boxes, or check boxes, check what else you used," and it was all the known competitors that we knew. So sometimes you have to kind of break the rules a bit to hear the stuff that maybe you don't intend on hearing. For DuPont, you can do maybe a specific scenario.
We often do expert interviews, and one way that we kind of pull out what else is out there in terms of competitor is blinded interviews. So they don't know it's us, and we have a specific script which includes how you solved this problem in the past. And so we collect evidence that way about which of the competitors are out there that are potentially we're going to have to beat. So that, and because it's blinded, there's no dog in the race or whatever the analogy is.
We train the participants to consider not in kind competition or other ways to solve the problem. We train the coaches to make sure that question gets asked if it's not being asked amongst the team themselves. And then the leadership, when they engage, Alexa's great for asking that exact question, but the leadership also asks those questions. And then we've implemented a scorecard where we're tracking risk through a project. And that scorecard specifically brings out that question. So if we miss it the first time, we're not going to miss it the second or third or fourth time.
I had a question on, I guess, is there a certain critical mass of customer feedback that you kind of tend to get from a desirability perspective? And then you mentioned confirmation bias earlier. How do you control for confirmation bias when you're getting that feedback?
Yeah, I'll start with that one. So not doing this by yourself is a good start. I do see us fall into that trap where I'll do this research, I'm going to take all this research and do it by myself. And when you do that, all your biases creep in, or if you saw some feedback you didn't quite like, you maybe tendency to not include that in the final results. Like it kind of just seeps in. So this is where I like the 3 circles of desirable, viable, feasible, and having leadership or representation of each, because we get together and we go through it together. One of the ways I do that is kind of fun way. I worked with a famous grocery store on their cake ordering process. And we observed the cake ordering process, which was kind of fun. It was kind of a project. And we wrote down all our notes from our interviews, and we came back. And rather than just handing that off to somebody to say, oh, go sort through all that and come up with the insights, we just wrote down everything we observed on sticky notes. And we kind of formed this like a semicircle up against the wall. And we just put them all up on the wall. And I said, hey, don't talk, take what you think sounds alike and start putting it together. And we affinity clustered it all and circled it and labeled it. And we're able to double click into specific themes that way. But I could see where if I had somebody go off and do that on their own, then who knows what the results would have been. But we did it as a team. For the number is very, I don't want to say the consultant answer of it depends, but it's very dependent on your business. So B2C, it's a very different number because we have a very different interaction with our customer. B2B, if you have 15 total clients, maybe you only need 5. But what I recommend is when we're looking, you usually see patterns by the 5th one. And so you hear the same thing a different way. So I would not go less than 5, but depending on how many you have available to you. We also use some different platforms to interview people that maybe we wouldn't have access to otherwise. So we go for, there's like userinterviews.com, which I'm not affiliated with, but if you want to, you'd be surprised who you can put in there as a criteria and find for interviews. So sometimes we can find people like that in interview as well if we're struggling to get access to people. But I realized you're not a B2C startup that can just go to Starbucks and find your customer in line. Our customers like cardiologists and people, you're not going to find those usually in line in Starbucks. So I think using these platforms, but also being mindful of, you want to see patterns in the responses. If you have a proper script, you have some consistency, you're testing a hypothesis, you will start to see patterns. But it's also a good conversation to have with leadership of what kind of evidence would we need to see to invest more in this? And that's why I like the metered funding approach, where we're not overfunding things early on. We're doing proportional level funding based on the evidence. So be careful of just overfunding things early on based on what you hear from one customer. I'd like to hear themes, maybe constrict that funding amount and give ourselves permission to increase the funding as we get more evidence over time.
In the electronics business, we often only have one customer, when looking at other things that go into mobile phones. It's one customer that matters, right? And in other cases, there might be two or three, right? What we do in those situations is try and get the customer to put skin in the game. That's our surrogate. There's not 100 and you're looking for, at least 30 customers. You're looking for the customer to put skin in the game, pay you for work, pay you for samples, JDAs, those kinds of things.
Okay, is there any more? All right, we're going to thank this group. Thank you so much.
Okay.